What's up? Okay. Sorry, I was 1 minute late. Here we go. So I'm going to go over a little bit of what we did on Wednesday, but then I'm going to dive right into Airtable data, I decided. So let me show them a screen. So last time we popped these cards in here, and this is a live view. If you remember, I've got this list of cards here that pulls in this page, and right now, everything we've done so far, if you watched last time, is we pulled the list of cards in, but with like dummy data. Like I was just saying, show 3 cards or show 6 cards. What we're gonna do today is we're gonna pull the Airtable data in, and then the Airtable, we're not going to set this manually. It's all dynamic, but the Airtable data will dictate how many cards there are. And then because these are a specific, this list of cards or list of rows, and the card is a specific thing in Builder, each of these cards is going to get the context of the row. And so I can explain it better once we pull it in. I show this, but basically what happens is if you have a card, a page like this that's acting as a card, and you use it in a list of rows or a list of cards, it's going to get, if it's pulling from a data collection to form that list, each row or each card is going to get variables for each column in the data collection. And inside of that card, if you set anything in Builder, like if you set to pull a variable from a data collection, you don't have to specify the ID or filter it in any way. It's going to know exactly what row it's on and make some assumptions. And so if that was a little confusing, hopefully it won't be in a second, but I'll explain that once the Airtable data is in. So first, I'm going to pull in this pattern of Airtable data, and I've done this only one time before, pulled the pattern, so I'm hoping it goes well. I'm just going to do it live. But the idea is with patterns is that anyone can create a pattern, and a pattern can consist of anything in Builder. So it can be a full template with classes, styles, actions, elements. It can be just an element, like maybe a custom element that you created. It can be just a few custom actions, multiple pages, one page. It can be anything. And then it gets a link, and you can share that link with someone else, and they can basically just import that pattern into their project. They import the pattern, they'll get, all the pages and whatever's in that workspace they imported, but they'll also get any custom actions or elements or classes, styles, that they can use anywhere. So what I'm going to do, I've already created this Airtable pattern separately, and the idea is in the future, anyone who wants to pull in Airtable data can use this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here into patterns and go to my pattern library. Now I have like a ton of test patterns in here. Yours won't look like this, but down at the bottom are some of my recent patterns that I've been making. And so there'll be some bigger announcements on this in the future soon. But right now, if you have access to Builder, you can actually use my patterns. They're on my profile page. But you can see I've got a few good ones here. Mailer light subscribe, a Twitter share button, a full Stripe pattern. So you can integrate Stripe with like literally a couple clicks. It's pretty nice. An upvote pattern, user authentication is like, it's a big pattern that I actually use on every project I make now, which is it includes sign in, sign up, with and without passwords, magic links, forget password flow, waitlist, maybe even a little more. And the idea is like, you import that pattern and you're done. It's built. So what I do is I import that user pattern, which I'll actually do this later on the live stream when we set up users for no code lists. Pull in that pattern, move one of those pages over to the workspace I want it, and I'm done. Here's like a template, a landing page with a waiting list template. It's a full, you can just spin up a project, have that landing page up. People can sign up for your waiting list. In the background, you're building your actual product. And then when your product goes live and you let people off the waiting list, they're already users. They're not just signed up to a mailing list. They're already active users of your project. They can't access it until you let them, but you let them off the list and everyone's in. And then, Airtable coming up. These ones up here are some of the tests and some earlier ones. So this Airtable one is the one I want. I can view this, or in my case, since I made it, I can open the project, For right now, I'm actually just going to import it so we can look at it. And so what happens is it's going to create a new workspace in my current no code list project with containing all of the Airtable stuff, whatever I have in this pattern, and then I'll be able to use it elsewhere. So my new workspace name, I'm just going to keep it Airtable pattern. It gives me the option to include data or not in the pattern, because a pattern itself can include data if you want, or if you're building tables or data collections and you have data in but it's just test data, maybe someone doesn't want to import it, they can click the X. In this case, it really doesn't matter. As far as I can remember, yeah, there's no data in this pattern, so it doesn't matter which one of those I pick. And then I've got to give it a second here to import, but now that it's done, you can see it created some Airtable pages, Airtable related pages, and I have some videos here. And these videos, we don't need to go into them today, but if you were importing this pattern and you didn't know anything about Airtable, you can actually watch these videos to learn how to use this quickly. And so some of these, like these videos, show you, where to find your API key in Airtable, how to find the base ID in Airtable, some simple things. This one here would describe like a quick use. And then here, which is actually the magic, I think, in this pattern really, is there's a way to pull more than 100 Airtable records at once. And so this one describes that. That's an Airtable limit with their API. And if you're coding their API, if you're just doing it from scratch, it's kind of tricky to get around. But if you use a library, usually the library will handle it. In this case, this is kind of like the builder library, so I'm handling it in here. And then these are just demo examples. And what the important part of what came over from this pattern is there's some actions in here. Like this one, get Airtable, get table data and set into element. And this is an action I created where you set your Airtable API key, your base ID, table name, and it can, you have some other settings if you want, and it'll just pop your data in. So in this case, I have Airtable pattern as a workspace. My main workspace for no code list is over here. Sometimes I would take something in this Airtable pattern, one of the pages, and move it over. But in this case, I don't need any of these pages. I just need the actions. So what I'm actually going to do is switch to my main workspace. And these workspaces are just organization. This is all one project. You can have a million workspaces in here. Keep your pages separate, but it acts as one project. So you can run an action on a page on a different workspace. All the styles are universal, that kind of thing. It's just an organization thing. Okay, so on this main no code list page, I have this list of cards, and right now I'm just pulling in some dummy cards, 6 dummy cards. Instead, I'm going to create an action group on this page, and this will be our first step into actions too, so I can describe some of this. But I'm going to create an action group, which is, I'm going to call it like, refresh Airtable list or get Airtable data, something like that. And the action itself is going to run that Airtable API call and populate the data into that list of cards. And then what I'll do is I'll have that as an action group, which means I can call it anywhere on this page whenever I want, or from other pages whenever I want. But what I'll do is I'll place that action onto this page binding action and describe how that flow works too, which what it means is when the page loads, it'll trigger that API call. So the first thing is I'll create my action group, and let's call it get Airtable data. And the action I want is one of these Airtable actions. So I'll search for Airtable. Oh, you know what? I think there's a tiny bug where I have to refresh before I get those actions. Sorry about that. And that will go away. That's just, patterns are fairly new. I mean, they're new, but, only in this last release. But we're still working out a few little bugs. And I did see it in the other workspace, so I assume that it'll be here. But like I said, this is pretty I've really never done this, especially live, so we'll see how it goes. All right, cool. So there's Airtable, get table data, and set into element. Okay, and so I can add this here, and I need to fill out a few things. So this is the fields that are like the minimum required fields: Airtable API key, Airtable base ID, and Airtable table name, that tells you you're allowed to pull that data. That's what the API key's for. Which base, which is like which project, and which table name, which table. And then you set the element you want to set that data into, which in our case is this list of cards element. And then there's this page offset variable, which has a default value. And we don't need to talk about that this second, but in like 2 minutes, I'll tell you what that means. So the first thing I'll do is I'll fill out these values and link this up so that we can see if this works. And what this will do, this is kind of the base level action. This will just pull in 100 Airtable records from the no code list. So let's see how it goes. So the first thing I'm going to do is set my Airtable API key. Now, when you pull in a pattern, API keys are secret to you. So you would never want anyone to see your API key. You don't want to share it. And actually, in a lot of no code tools that are front end only, you really don't even have a way of hiding your API key. But Builder has a whole system around secrets, we call them, which is like API keys or other data that you don't ever want to be sent to the browser. You don't ever want someone to be able to find an API key or sometimes other secret data. And the way it works, you can get to this from project settings in here, or if you're on a field that is a secret, so it's set to secret up here, I can hit manage project secrets. And I'll explain this too in 1 second, because that's kind of a cool thing too. I'm not getting the Airtable as fast as I thought because there's a lot to explain in between, but bear with me. All right, so secrets is here, and right now I have no secrets, nothing listed. So I can create a new secret, and I can call it Airtable API. I mean, I can call it whatever I want, but whoops, I'll call this one Airtable API key. And so it gives me, by default, I can set a value for each of my deployments. And so right now, or anytime you're working in the studio, you're working in the development deployment, but you can also publish to a test URL or test deployment and a production deployment or production URL. And I think I mentioned this the first day I was live streaming, but the reason is because you can publish to your production and have a stable working app for your users, and then work in the development version. And if you break things or whatever, it's not going to affect your users until you publish that development out to production. So the professional flow, or like the common flow, would be you work in development, publish to test, and then have some testers in there. And when it's good in test, you can go from test to production. And it's basically a way to know that anytime something gets to production, you're in good shape. But I'm going to fill these out. And what I'm going to do, you have to get these values from Airtable. So you go to your Airtable profile, and there's a video in the pattern that shows you, so I'm not going to go through how to find it. And I'm actually going to hide my screen so you don't see my key. But basically, you follow the video in the pattern, it'll show you where to find your Airtable key. So for me, I'm going to do this real quick. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to my account, my Airtable account page, and right on there, there's an API key. And I copy it, and then I paste it, the same key, into all 3 values for that secret. And so now the secret is hidden. The secret's hidden from view here. So now that I added those and saved them, I open them back up and you can see they're blurred out here. But these are my keys. I just put the same thing into each of these, same value into each of these fields. And the reason you can do separate values would be for something, a good example, something like Stripe. You have a test API key for test transactions and a live API key for live transactions, and everything else is the same for Stripe. So you can have it all set up, and in your test environment, you could use that test API key. In your production environment, you could use that live API key. And that way, once you set it up, you never have to mess with it. And all your testers are doing test transactions, and your production users are doing live transactions. So anyway, all that is to say, I have that secret in my project now, and I can use it anywhere. So in this case, I just select it. So now I have Airtable API key set. The base ID and the table name, again, they're in videos too. So let me see the best way to do this. I actually forget off the top of my head how to find these. So let me test this out. I think what you can do is you can go to airtable.api or airtable.com/API, and then it'll give me it listed here. And if not, I'll look it up. Yeah, it's right here. So idea of this base is this, and the Airtable API, if you know APIs but you don't know Airtables, it's really cool, this documentation, because it's 100% literal to your project. So I clicked on the no code list Airtable project, and all of the documentation is specific to this project, and like this base API is specific to this project. So I just paste that in here, and then the table name is this, I believe. No code software lists. And I'm just going to type that, and we'll see if that's not the table name, then I'll do it over. Oh, and actually a little tip too is if you rename table like that, you can just copy that. And I'll make sure just so I didn't mistype it or anything. Okay, so that's that. So we got all the Airtable stuff we need to set up. The element to set data into, I'm going to select this list of cards element that's on my page. So I have the element tree in order on my page here, and I can find this list of cards here. And I could also, if I wanted to, if I had like a lot of things, you know, I could name this, like this is the main software list, right? And then when I come in here and select an element, maybe it'll update. There we go. List of cards, main software list. And so yeah, so now I'm set up. That's all you need to initially bring Airtable in. And I'm gonna do that thing, like I said, to do over 100 records, but that's all you need. And that is an action now that's set up and reusable from anywhere. And the only thing I need to do is actually trigger that action to run when the page loads. So really quickly before I test this, we have these two actions related to a page loading. So I'm on this main page here, but this applies to any page, including pages on other pages. So when this main page runs, it's going to run its own page load action. And when each of these pages gets loaded into the page, it'll run its own page load action. The page load action fires once on page load, and by default, it has one action in it called page binding. So I can add more actions into here if I want. Or most of the time, it's just going to run page binding. Page binding, it's very similar to page load, except that you can call it, or it sometimes gets called more often than page load. Page load is only one time when that page is loaded, but page binding, you know, you could trigger it if a list item is added to a list. You could trigger page binding, and it'll bring all the new items in live. You could, I mean, there's other stuff you can do with page binding, so it's a little more versatile. And the way I think of it is, if something has to happen once and once only, you put on page load. If you think you might use it again, like get Airtable data, if something changed, or if I want to re-get that data, I feel like I might use it again. So I'm going to put this on page binding, but it doesn't really even matter. And so I can add an action here. And I don't know how much I went into actions. I don't remember yet, but there's a ton of built-in actions here for all kinds of different things. Or I can nest another action group. And in this case, I'll go into more actions when I use different actions. In this case, I have that get Airtable data action that I'm going to nest. And I can select it from the list right here. And so now it's in there, get Airtable data. So now when this page loads, it's going to pull from Airtable, and it's going to load up these cards. Right now, nothing else is going to happen, meaning it's going to load, if it does it successfully, it's going to pull in 100 records. It's just going to load 100 of this card, but this information is just going to say software, this is the description, etc. Well, let's give it a shot before I go too much further. It brought in one card. That's interesting. Okay. Let me just double check this stuff. I don't think this matters. I'm just going to change some of this and double check. These are all optional, so I shouldn't need to set these, but I'm wondering if maybe I did need to set them. Oh, there we go. I don't know if it was because I set those. I'll check in a second. But you can see now I've loaded in 100 records. And so you might not be able to tell because it's not identifying these, but this is real Airtable data coming from Airtable. So it's that easy to pull in Airtable. And then the really cool thing at this point is once this Airtable data is in Builder, it's Builder data. Like I can do anything that I would do with Builder with native Builder data, I can just do with this data. So it's really versatile at this point to where all I need to do is get that data into my application, and now I manipulate it like anything else. And so I think for the next step, I'm gonna just pop in a something here to show, and then I'll explain more about how the context works and bring in the actual, like displaying the actual values from each Airtable row. But I'm just gonna do this first and make sure that it works. Let's see, what would this be called? Name. Nice. All right, so you can see here. Oh, that's a blank one. That's crazy. I don't know why there's a blank one. That's probably in my data. Drop source, ConvertKit, MemberSpace, Weglot. They're all software that's on the no-code list. So you can see that it is working and loading in. And the next step would be to fill this all out, like fill out the name with the name, the logo with the logo, description with the description, and then do some conditionals to say, do they have any endorsements? If so, display this message. If not, display this message. Do I have an affiliate link? If so, display it. And then listing the categories is another thing. The way that we do that is we bind data, and you can do this from Builder native data, or in this case from Airtable data. You bind data to each of these elements. So I bind the name field to this element here, which is called software name, but it's just a heading called software name. I bind the image data to this image element here, that kind of thing. And so the way that binding works is if you, it's a little bit, it's like jumping a step forward if you do this from Airtable, but that's okay. It's if you think of this from a Builder native collection, native data, what you're doing is you're binding data to an element, and then Builder knows that element is kind of like representing that data for that row, and it infers a whole bunch of other stuff and can do some cool stuff because it has that context. So on any element that can have that, like any element that can have text in it or an image, SRC value in it, whatever, you're going to get this data tab up here. So property, styling, events, and data. And data, I did this quickly to test and I set it from a variable, but you can set a record value, and I can say from a variable like I did, or I can say from a field, and then I can set a data collection. So I didn't make any data collections in this project yet, but I could choose a collection like users, which is a default collection, choose a data field, that's in there. And basically now this element will always display from the users collection, the login ID field. And the way it knows which row to display, which user to display, is because it's in the context of this list of rows. And so that concept hopefully wasn't too confusing to just explain in a shot like that, but like that concept is very powerful in how you get, so much stuff done. I was going to say almost everything done in Builder, but really just so much stuff done in Builder. And then the same thing applies if you do from variable, you can bind it to a variable instead. And then the same thing applies if I'm on this list of cards. I don't actually want to bind one field from a collection. I want to bind a whole collection to it so that it displays each row, and then I bind the fields on the page, on this page. So to do that, it's very similar. It's just that instead of record value, you can choose collection list, and you choose the collection and some other settings if you want to filter it or anything like that. Like choose which fields you want to bring in. You don't have to bring them all, but you can just bring them all. Filters, sorting, that kind of thing. But for now, because I'm using Airtable and not an actual Builder collection, so when I pull from a collection list or from a field here, that means like a Builder field. So because I'm not pulling from a Builder field, I'm using something else which is similar but a little different, which is a built-in variable. So in the same way that if I have this list and it was pulling from, say it was pulling from a native Builder data collection, I would be able to have context of each of the fields on this page. In the same way, even if it's not a builder collection, if it's any form of JSON, which is what this actually is behind the scenes, it'll give me a variable on this page with the JSON key name, which in this case is the Airtable column name, and then the value. And so that means that on a normal, if I had a native builder collection and I had these cards and I had a name field, I'd come into here and I'd choose from field, choose the collection, and choose the field name. But instead, I have a name variable, only because it's not a builder native collection. And you would have it also in a builder native collection. But I just go from variable, and I know the column name of Airtable is name. That's how I got that. And so that's all I have to do for that. And then I have to do it for each of these other sections. And the ones that are conditionals, like the one like an affiliate message, I only want to display if I actually have an affiliate link filled out in Airtable. So for those, I'm going to do it with actions over here with a conditional that checks a value first and then displays something or not display something. Last thing I'll mention about this is when you have the bindings, you can do a little bit more. I'm not going to go into this now because it's a little different with variables, but if you bind to native builder data collections, running page binding will update everything. Anything that's bound, page binding finds all those and updates. B, there's another built-in action called autosave here, which if you have an input and it's bound to data, for example, and then you change that input, you can have it say on change run autosave. It'll autosave whatever you change without, you don't have to like write any of that. You don't have to set any of that up. You don't have to say if this is changed, go to this table, set this. It's like it knows what it's bound to. It's set to autosave. You make the change, it saves. So yeah, lots of benefits to data. That's the point there. So back to this. I'm gonna do. So I did the name here, and I'm gonna do the image next really quickly. And you can see also this software name. Well, that's actually purple for the wrong reason. When you bind stuff to a data collection, it turns purple, so you can see it. That's actually not supposed to be purple because it's a variable and it's doing it wrong. So I don't know what. That's okay. I was gonna mention that, but really that only applies to data collections. But it is a really easy way to see what's bound. And then also when you start having actions on elements, there's a little action icon, so you can easily see what has an action or what's going to trigger an action. For this image, I'm going to do a very similar thing. I do from variable. In this case, it's called image. And the cool thing about this is when I set that heading from a variable, I'm just like binding data. Like I'm not choosing what it's changing or whatever, but Builder knows that if it's a heading and I bind data, change the text of that heading. If it's an image, change the SRC value. So this image, the Airtable pattern actually formats everything exactly how we want it for Builder. So it's going to return just an image URL that's hosted in Airtable. And so all I have to do is say from variable image, and then this will work. So you can see they're popping in. And so far, this is all default styling for the most part. I mean, I put these side by side, but I can just go in and style these next. And I mentioned last time about placeholders and styles. And then, that's largely done. In a real site, I'll do these categories and filters, but it's pretty cool how fast it is. And then I'm only going to do, for now, probably description before I do something else. I'll do those conditionals later, maybe description and categories. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll do categories because that's a kind of cool, unique one. So again, from variable, excerpt, I call the description. And then categories, I'll show you in a second. So yeah, so that works. These descriptions. Categories is its own list of a list. Meaning you can select multiple categories. So in Airtable, it's here. So like this one has one category, this one has one, but this one has two or more. This one has two or more. And so the way that Builder pulls that data in, if it's one of these multi-select columns in Airtable, Builder pulls it in as JSON data that you can use another list of rows or list of cards to display. And the reason for that, I could pull it in as a string, right? Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to list the categories. Data integrations, data and databases, common integrations, data and databases, automation workflows. I'm trying to list those. So I could just have Airtable spit out like text that's like websites, comma, blockchain, comma, whatever for each of these values, and that would work fine. But if I use this page setup, then I can actually control each of these categories individually. So maybe when I click on one, it takes me to that category page, or it filters by that or something. So there's an advantage to doing it by lists, and that's why I'm going to do it this way. That's why it sort of defaults you to doing it that way. But it's also very easy. And so the way it works, this, let's see, I don't know why this is a description here. That was just naming, that doesn't do anything. All right, so I have categories here, but instead of an actual text field, I'm going to add a, let's see what I'm going to add, maybe a list of cards. It doesn't really matter. It's more of like a style thing, but I needed a list of rows or a list of rows or a list of cards. But this list of cards needs a page to display for each row. And the page is going to be like really simple, but I'll just add this. This is basically a category. I don't even know. I might change that later, but it's like one category. And all I really need for it, at least to start, is just some text. So I'll just put this text box here, which is the category name. And just checking these styles. That's fine for now. But one thing I will do in the properties of text box, it's a p tag right now, which is a block level element. But since I know I want to list these, I'll just change this to a span, which is an inline element. So now I have that page created. I go back to this list of cards, and in its properties, I select the row page of category. And so now it's going to load in. You can see right there it says name, 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 and they're not styled, but it's going to load in that category. Now here, I want to bind this data to, so it's kind of confusing. It is a list. It's a JSON list because it's a list of these categories, but it's specific to each of these rows. So like the first list will be one item websites. The second, second cards list will be one item blockchains. The third card list will be 2 items. So it's kind of like these lists within lists. And so I'm setting it in a similar way, but it's so confusing to describe this, and it's not native builder, which is so self-explanatory more. But with Airtable, so it's not really a collection list I'm pulling in. I'm pulling in a record value, which is a variable, but that variable is JSON, so it's going to function like a collection list. And I apologize for that confusion. It's just semantics. So this one, it was called categories, plural, with a capital C. So if I do that, I'm just taking from variable categories. In theory, I think when I try this now, I should see, it'll just say name. It won't say the category name yet, but I should see the correct number for each card. Here's hoping. So 1 for that, 1 for that, 1. Here's 2. So it looks like it's correct. Like this one, Action Desk, I actually remember had 2 categories. So it looks correct. That's great. And then if you remember, we'll do something similar on this page. So this list of cards now has the context of that variable. And this is explained in the Airtable pattern, but when you pull in those multi-select fields in the builder Airtable pattern, it brings them over as JSON. That's key values, basically, that says value, first value, value, second value, value, third value. So it's like the name of the field you want is called value always. And so if I use a variable value on this, it's going to always be whatever this is, this value, data and databases, apps native. It's just going to be those. And the reason I say it's explain the pattern is because you wouldn't know that otherwise, but it makes everything really easy, and it's a builder way to do things. So it's in the pattern. So here I go data to bind it from variable. And like I said, it's just value, all lowercase. So there you go. You can see apps native, email, memberships. And there's a few more things to do here, like for cleanup, obviously the styling to put it small and to the right. But if you look, there's no comma in between them. But it's easy to add. So I'll add that stuff at some point, I think. I don't think I'm going to go into the styling. I think I'll do all the styling at once together, so I'm not jumping around so much. But shoot, I lost my train of thought. There's something I wanted to dive right into after this. Oh, you know what it is? Oh, before we get too far, I do want to do the trick where we pull in more than 100 Airtable records. It's actually really important. If you've ever used Airtable, it's a frustrating thing. It's understandable, like they can't just have everyone querying their API constantly. But basically, you can only get 100 records at a time. And if there are more records, it'll return a specific value that you need to send back to them to return the next set of records. So it kind of forces you to slow down your calls and make one call, get the response, make the next call kind of thing. But at the same time, if you make more than 5 API calls, in a second, then you get shut out for like 30 seconds or something. So there's all these restrictions. It makes it really confusing. What I set up in the Airtable pattern, it just kind of like loops it and limits it a little bit so that you are unlikely to run into that problem. You know, it won't run 5 in 1 second, but it will run more than 100 and just keep running until you run out of rows. So I haven't fully tested every scenario, but so far in my scenarios, like it's doing everything well. And in the case of no code lists, it's a little bit under 300 entries right now, which means every time someone loads the no code list page, it's going to hit the Airtable API 3 times to get those 300 records, which also means if 2 people load the page at the same exact time, the same second, we're going to be over the limit for that second. So you need something in there to limit you. And that's what this does. So this kind of takes all that complexity and wraps it up nicely for you. And the other thing, just to note, if you are doing this, I also run no code lists through Cloudflare. And they have caching there. So I can cache the responses more aggressively so that everyone's not querying Airtable every time. That's a whole separate topic, but just a nice little tip. So here I describe, and back in the Airtable pattern, I describe how to pull more than 100 records. And in this demo, instead of like reading through this now, in this demo, I'm just gonna go to the correct action. What it is I'm running the original action that I'm already running. And if you remember, there was this variable at the bottom. Let me close this. This variable at the bottom called current Airtable page offset value. That variable is what I was talking about. If there's more than 100 records, it's going to return that. It's going to return 100 records, and it's going to return this value that you need to send back to Airtable for the next records. So that value is going to get set to this page offset variable. By default, it's set to this value, and you can keep it at that value, which will work by default to make everything else work. Alternatively, you could, if you wanted to, change this value because like depending on your application you're building, you might need to use it. But 99% of the time, you just don't touch that value and this will just work. So you run that action once, and then after it, you run a condition, which is a built-in builder action. And the condition is going to check the current value for that variable we just set, that offset variable. And it's going to say if that current value doesn't equal nothing, which means if there is a value in that variable, then just run this whole action again. And if there's not a value for the page offset, which means we hit the end, there's no next page, then do nothing. That's what action if false is just set to nothing, so do nothing. And that's how it works. So it's gonna get 100 records. It's gonna get that offset variable if it needs to get another page, and then it checks for that offset variable and runs the action again if it needs to. And so what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to actually go in here and I'm going to copy this action, and then I'm going to go to my main workspace where I'm calling the Airtable stuff, get Airtable data, and then I'm going to paste this action. And I could just go in here and type condition, and condition compare values is what I want. I could add it right here. But it's, in this case, I already have that filled out, so why not copy paste it? So current Airtable page offset value is correct. Up here, just to double check, current Airtable page offset value doesn't equal nothing is correct. And then action if true is not set because I put this on a different page. These actions are page specific, which, side note, you can call actions on other pages, but in this dropdown you can't, but there's a way to. So action if true, I want to run the same main action again. I want to loop this action. So I'm going to choose get Airtable data, which is actually the action I'm in. That's how it works. And then if the action is false, do nothing. And the last thing I'll do, see this don't wait in between here? If I get the Airtable data, it has to get the response from Airtable, which takes a second, and then it sets it into this variable. So I actually need to wait. So if I click that don't wait, I can toggle this in here. I need to wait until this action finishes before I run this action, because I'm using a variable from this action in this action. So that's what that don't wait is. So it's important. If you forget to set that, it's going to run these more or less at the same time. You know, they might be like a fraction of a second or fraction of a millisecond off or whatever, but it's going to be, you can think of it as they're running at the same time if there's a don't wait. So you put that wait, it's an important thing there. And I think that should be good. I'm going to test this now. So the last one we see is Sandbox e-commerce or Sandbox Commerce, another Austin company. Now we should see more than that. I'm gonna try to see when it gets there so I can stop on it too. Oh, didn't work, but there's Sandbox e-commerce. Let me do something a little out of the ordinary here, just in case, and then I'll go back and try to fix that. And I think I did that last time too. What I did was I cleared my local, like my in-browser data, and just kind of, like, I wanted to pull this fresh just in case. Yeah, it's still not doing it. So let's just check. And if you're new to building, I've noticed that this surprises a lot of people who are new to building stuff. But this situation where you try something, doesn't work, you test it, you try it, doesn't work, trial and error, change something. That's like what building, that's like what coding is, you know? I mean, as you get better, obviously it happens a little less, but this is like what I do. This is how I build. I'm constantly like, I set stuff up, I look at it, I'm like, that didn't work. What do I do now? And for me, I actually have some extra tools at my disposal to debug this stuff. So maybe some of that will come into play. But for the most part, you're doing like some trial and error. So right now, I don't actually even know what I'm going to try next. I'm going to look through and see what's up. But, you know, I have to go in and just like figure out why this didn't work. That's super common. And like, if you feel like that's frustrating, then, you know, I would say just get used to it basically. But if you're thinking, like, if you're putting yourself down for it, if you're just getting started building, don't, because it's like, that's how building works. All right, so I'm just gonna look through this and just see. So I know this original one did work because it got those 100. And like, I don't know, I have this stuff set. I can't imagine that would affect it, but maybe I'll try changing those. Oh, here we go. Variable with offset is not set here. And so, okay, so that makes total sense. So what that is, and you know what? Maybe I'll default that for the pattern in the future. So what that is it loaded the first 100, it got the page variable for the next 100, it set it, and then it ran the Airtable action again, but I forgot to send the actual page variable with the next call. So if you don't send an offset variable, it's just going to bring the first 100 rows. If you do send an offset variable, it's going to bring whatever set of 100 it needs to. And so, yeah, I just forgot to put that in here. So that's, I thought I copied that value. So that's this variable name. I just need to set into here. And it's just like all of these inputs are things that I'm sending to the Airtable API. And I just needed to send that. That's really, I'm sure that's all that was. So let's refresh this, and then I think it'll go further down than Sandbox Commerce. But like I said, no problem. I mean, that's what building is. And I knew like in the beginning when I was doing these live streams, some of the easy stuff in the beginning would be no problem, but I knew that it would come to this where I'm just sitting here testing through something and it is potentially boring. So what I did, what I set up, in my opinion, seemed like it would be correct. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to watch the network calls, and I'm going to look for this network call, and I can actually see what I'm sending through Builder but to Airtable, and I can see what is getting returned back to me. And that's a little bit advanced. Like if you're coming in with no knowledge of code or any of this stuff, it might be tricky to come in here. But as a developer, I mean, you know, I live in this inspector. It's open all the time, and I actually know how to do all that. So I'm just going to take advantage. So I'll refresh this page. You can see a lot of stuff's happening over here. This is like every request that the page makes. So all the different images, all the JavaScript files and style sheets and all that. In addition, all the network calls. And I know from working for Builder that and you know, because I made this Airtable action, that what I'm looking for is HTTP call. And so I can see this one has a response where this is the first one we see with drop source and ConvertKit. So it's sending it correctly here. This is probably like super long, but at the end, maybe at the beginning, somewhere it should be saying, it should be returning that. Oh, you know what? I hid that variable because I built it in the action. All right, so at least we know that one's working. So that's HTTP call. And then if I come down, okay, interesting. So it looks like it's actually never making the second HTTP call to Airtable. So what that tells me is that this conditional here is not working. So let's see. If current Airtable page offset value doesn't equal nothing. So if there is an offset value, then run this again. And then here, that's set. That's set. Could possibly be this. I doubt it. Oh, yeah, you know what it was that. So that was so dumb of me. So I just set it to max records 100. So it just kept returning that there's no next page because it returns 100 values and there's no next page. Dumb. Hopefully by removing it, you know, when this didn't work at first, I added those and then it worked and I never like investigated why. Hopefully this still works, but if it does, I'm hoping we'll get more than the 100. All right, yeah. So here's Sandbox e-commerce where it used to stop. And now you can see it keeps going. And so I can only assume right now, I could count these, but I assume this is the full 300. It makes sense. They're in random order because I didn't set any ordering or anything. But that's that. And so just for my own sanity, maybe I'll actually set a filter by real quick. I mean a sort by field real quick. That'll just be name, and I want ascending, so it's like alphabetical starting with A. And actually, when I relaunch this on Builder and start improving no-code lists, that'll be one of the first things that changes, is that alphabetical order. It means something much more useful on the homepage. So, okay, you can see 8B website builder abridged action desk. If I go to the live page, 8B abridged action desk. If I go all the way to the bottom, then I got Zendesk Sunshine and Zudi. Zendesk and Zudi. And so they look a little different. I need a style, but that's that. And so for me, if this were, you know, the crux of this project is displaying these Airtable values, like that's mostly done, which is really cool. And kind of like, you know, compared to how it was when I originally built a no-code list, just to give you some context, I built a no-code list, like I said, originally in Ghost, and Ghost isn't really made for this type of site. So I had to build, you know, do a custom theme with a lot of JavaScript and that kind of thing. And then, you know, I mentioned that secret Airtable key. I couldn't do anything out of Ghost that wouldn't expose that key. So what I actually did on top of that is I built my own API, which is just, you know, it's like code. It's PHP on a server that I own or rent. And I run all the calls from the no-code list through the no-code list API and then send them into Ghost through JavaScript. It's a whole crazy thing. So when I compare what I just did to that, it blows my mind. And you'll see too, there's another Airtable action to just list these categories, which actually maybe we can just do that next and then be done because it's a 10 minutes left in the hour. But yeah, maybe I'll pull these categories in, which is a little risky because I haven't done much with that yet, but I'm pretty sure it'll work. And then we can be done. And then that would be a good place to stop too, because we have all the Airtable data in, we'll have the categories in, and then next time on Monday, I'll get this filtering working, which luckily for me, Dorian, who works at Builder also, just created a pattern that's going to do this filtering for me. And I was planning on, I ran this live stream. I started this live stream knowing that I'm gonna have to figure this out before I get to it. And I just realized today, I was like, ooh, I'm gonna get to that next week. But luckily Dorian completed it for me. So I'll use that, and basically just the filtering will start working out of the box. And then it's gonna be a lot of styling after that. We'll clean everything up and finish it up. And there's more to do, but that'll be like essentially the base level chunk of the site, like a pretty significant percentage of the site done. So it's kind of cool. And 3 hours total. I haven't touched 3 hours of explaining everything too. Like I haven't touched this in between these live streams. So for me to sit down and do this might be an hour or less. Anyway, let's see. Categories. So if I go back to this Airtable pattern, do I have a demo of the, oh, you know what? Maybe I didn't make the categories yet, actually. Is that possible? I could have sworn I did, but maybe I didn't. So in that case, I'll do that next time. I'll add that actually into the pattern. I swear I have it. You know what? I must have just not published the pattern. That's what it was. So I probably have that built in the pattern and just didn't republish. The way patterns work is the same as projects. So I have a production, well, it's the actual deployment instead of development, test, production. There's actually a deployment called pattern. That's like my production pattern. That is what everyone uses. And then I have my own version in the studio when I build it. That's development. And when I'm ready to push that to the actual real pattern, I just publish from development to patterns. So I'm almost positive I just didn't publish those. I apologize, but that's fine. We'll do that next time. I might just wrap it up for now, because I don't want to start anything big. There's 7 minutes left here. Ooh, I see a question though, so that's good. I can answer that. When I first loaded the action in, what was the toggle I switched? Could it be related to this error? Oh, for the error. This, I think what you're referring to is actually this toggle here, which is, it doesn't do anything except show more options. So you can see it's called show advanced Airtable options. And the reason this has to do with how I set up the actual Airtable action, but that's all it is. If you click this, a couple more fields pop in down here. And if it's not showing, they're hidden. And that's only for visual. It's not, it doesn't do anything, anything more. Like those fields, when this is hidden, those fields are all still filled out and valid under there. Trying to think if there's anything quickly that would be cool to go over before I wrap it up. Oops. I mean, not really. I think a lot of the stuff that's left is going to be some styling. I think the exciting things left would be handling those categories and then doing the animations that make these hovers all work. I think that would be pretty fun because I'll do a CSS animation, and the categories is just like a cool thing that makes something complex pretty easy. And then I think there'll be a decent amount to do on these cards to actually style them. As you can see already, they're not matching. Like these images are a little bigger and there's spacing and that kind of thing. Ooh, and I forgot I have the showcase button I can add. So that'll take a minute. So I think what we'll do is next week I'll either go categories and animations, or I'll go into the styles of these. But that should be good. Let's see. And then the next step after that, moving forward would be each of these. Right now, each tool has its own page, but they're pretty iffy. They're pretty bare bones. So that'll be the next step, is I'll make a page. And I'll do, in Builder, I'll do correct dynamic URLs. This URL is horrible. And when you share it, it doesn't have any share images. There's some big problems with the way I made these pages. So I can't wait to redo that correctly in Builder and show everyone how that works. But that's also another big thing. So yeah, I think I'll just wrap it up. Appreciate everyone watching, and hopefully that was cool. I think kind of like we did a lot of stuff just to ultimately have some real data in here, but the idea that I just took this data and when I update it, you know, it updates here on my live site is pretty cool. So with that, I'm gonna call it. I'm gonna be back Monday, same time, Wednesday, same time, and then that Friday, I'm gonna skip because I'll be out of the office, but pick it up again the following Monday. So yeah, for now, see you Monday. Thanks again for watching. And that's it.